Welcome to the From Concealment Podcast, the show for firearm enthusiasts who like to shoot, train, carry, and compete. Get ready for some shooting and sight, firearm and accessory reviews, and of course, insight on concealed carry. And now, broadcasting from behind enemy lines in the From Concealment studio, it's Pete Mitchell and Dan Sams.
Hey, Freedom Nation, this is Pete Mitchell from the From Concealment Podcast.
And I am Dan Sams.
And this week's podcast is being brought to you by Fast OC. If you are in Orange County, California, you've definitely got to check out Fast OC. They have got just all kinds of training programs. They've got handgun self-defense. They've got what they call advanced CCW, or what we would call from concealment training. Mm-hmm. They have shotgun training. They've got what I really love, handgun competitions and even AK competition training. They've got some of the best instructors you will find. In fact, one of the guys who does a lot of their advanced CCW stuff, I believe it's the advanced CCW, he is actually the former head trainer for the Air Marshals. And so he teaches a lot of close quarter combat. In fact, some of the stuff he teaches, Lance, the owner over there, had to go, no, look, we cannot teach them that. That's a little bit too much. You know, like awesome. If someone's on top of you, I kid you not, this was one of the things the guy was like, this is what they train on, right? Because if you think about it, you're on an airplane, and, you know, it's going down. The other guy's on top of you. What's the problem if you've got your firearm and you're pressed up against them? The problem is you're out of battery, so the gun's not going to fire.
Oh, yeah.
So you got a semi-automatic. I mean, that's actually one of the benefits of a revolver, right? I mean, you can put that right up against somebody and you're going to get splattered, but the gun's going to fire. Semi-automatic, you're out of battery, it's not going to fire. So what they do is they literally train them, okay, you have to grip the slide and push it forward. And that's how you're firing the gun. So
holy cow.
I know. Imagine what that's doing to your hand, right? He's like, no, we cannot teach them that. That's too much. That's you know, these are civilians. We're not on an airplane. But
you know what though? I think about that for a rape victim, right? A woman who's getting attacked and he's on her, man, she needs to know how to do that. Yeah. I don't think that's a bad thing to teach civilians at all.
I don't know how you teach it other than like, here's a cert gun or, you know, the blue plastic guns. I mean, because you know some idiot's going to accidentally pull the trigger and blow a hole in their hand and all that.
Yeah, because I mean, you're going to get yourself hurt, but man, it's going to
save your life.
Save your life, yeah. If you're in that situation, things are already pretty dire. We'll take a hand injury to save a life, man. Yeah, no, I'm glad he's teaching that. Interesting. When I took one of my courses, not with Fast OC, it was somebody out here, but they taught about you know pushing that slide out of battery in a defensive situation. That one of the best things you can do is actually grab the gun, or and they even taught on a revolver. They're like, you can grab onto that cylinder just right, and it is possible to keep that gun from firing. You got to have a really good grip.
Sure.
But they're like, when there's nothing else you can do, that's one thing you can do.
Right.
I'm like, we'll take whatever I can get, man.
Yeah.
Oh,
exactly.
That's cool.
I mean, that's so anyway, bottom line is, guys, training is fun. The handgun competitions are fantastic. You'll usually find me out at the handgun competitions. I'm a paying member just like everyone else. I love it. That's why I do it. And it's actually one of those few things where you get to train with the adrenaline pumping through your veins and your heart rate's up. And in fact, I did a competition this last week, and it was so funny because all of us, the very first stage, I did not perform at my best, and my adrenaline was through the roof. It had been, probably 3 weeks since I'd been at a competition. And so I just, I wasn't used to it. And that's the whole benefit of doing a competition is how else do you get to train with your adrenaline pumping? Because let's face it, if you have to actually use a handgun in self-defense, your adrenaline's going to be through the roof.
Yeah, man.
So it's advisable to train that way whenever you can. But anyway, guys,
cool,
one of the things that I wanted to discuss on today's podcast. I was at the store, the grocery store, I don't know, a couple of weeks back, and I picked up a copy of Discover magazine. It's called Science for the Curious, Discover, and the reason why I picked it up was the cover is Inside the Public Health Crisis of Gun Violence. And so, of course, I pick it up just assuming this is going to be an anti-gun article. I was pleasantly surprised that it, in my opinion, actually wasn't as anti-gun as perhaps maybe some people would like to take. But I think you can take stats and use them any way you want to use them. Mm-hmm. I thought it was actually very, very well done and very fairly done. However, one of the big things that they talk about in this article is guns and their use in suicide. And so, the thing that you always hear is, well, America's suicide rate by guns far exceeds every other country. And I'm looking here at the countries that they have listed. And this, by the way, let me see. This is firearm suicide death rates in U.S. and other high-income countries for 2015. And so what they look at is for every 100,000 people, how many are committing suicide by firearm? And fortunately, they were very fair in how they did this because they said, okay, we're going to do one column for suicide by firearm and another column for suicide by non-firearm. And to me, that's a really important statistic to look at because we have a lot of firearms available to us in the United States, more than any other country. So it kind of doesn't surprise me that we have the highest number of suicides by firearm because we have all the firearms. In fact, for every 100,000 people in 2015, 6.9 people committed suicide by a firearm out of every 100,000. And every non-firearm suicide was also 6.9 for the United States, which gives us 13.8 people out of every 100,000 commit suicide by firearm. And you look at that and people go, oh, well, look at that. The rates are so high at 6.9. We could eliminate half of that if we eliminated the firearms. And my argument has always been, but are we really eliminating suicide or are we just eliminating suicide by firearm, right? Which is, that's kind of the whole argument right there. I mean, okay, so what if we're eliminating it by firearm if we still have the same numbers? So what I think is really kind of interesting to look at is let's start adding up suicide by firearm and suicide by non-firearm for all the countries. So we're at 13.8. And if you look at Australia, they're at 0.7, right, for firearm and 12 for non-firearm.
Huh.
So they're at 12.7, really not a huge difference there.
Yeah.
Austria, 2.5 by firearm, but 12 for non-firearm. So they're more than us. They're at 14.5, just slightly over us. Belgium, 1.1 for firearm, 15.5 for non-firearm. So they're considerably over us. Canada, they're 1.5 with, 10 without. So again, they're at 11.5. They're close, down from us, a couple of people there. So it must be nicer in Canada after all. Chile's really low, actually. They're 0.5 for with a firearm, 9.8 without a firearm. But you start looking at some of these other countries, and the numbers are just incredible. So Japan, which has a strict no firearm policy, 18.4 for non-firearm.
Yikes.
Which is huge. Poland, 0.1 with, 14.2 without.
Yikes.
Slovenia, 1.7 with, 18.7 without. So I mean that's got to be the highest out of everybody. That's like 20. So I mean the stats as I'm looking at this, I'm like, okay, yeah, we have a lot of suicides by firearm, But it seems to me that when you look at these and you see most countries are hovering in that same range of between about 12 and 14. Most countries seem to be in that range, with some that are dipping above that, some that are dipping slightly below that. It seems to be a more of a human condition issue, meaning people are committing suicide about the same level, but we're getting... I think we're looking at the wrong thing, I think is what my point is. I think we're looking at how are they committing suicide as opposed to, okay, what is leading people to commit suicide? Like, what is the issue that they're facing? Now, to be fair, there are some countries that are incredibly low. Israel, I thought, was really interesting. With a firearm, 0.4. Without a firearm, 3.8. So they're much lower.
Low suicide rate, but as I understand, there's relatively easy access to guns in Israel.
Very easy access to guns. However, this was an interesting thing that I read. So around the same time, I'm going to quote here from the magazine, around the same time, a similar phenomenon happened in Israel, which began requiring soldiers to leave guns on base during weekend leave. After the policy changed, suicide among 18 to 21-year-old soldiers fell by 40% annually. And the authors of a 2010 study of the policy's consequences observed that a reduction in weekend suicides, rather than during the week, was responsible for nearly the entire drop in deaths. So, someone would look at that and go, okay, well, then we do see that taking away guns will lower suicide rate. My argument to that would be, okay, we have seen that happen, but will that stay the same? It could just be the knee-jerk reaction of, okay, well, I used to have a gun, now I don't have a gun. And then are we going to see, like these other countries, okay, they're going to find other ways to commit suicide? I think we need to see more time elapse before you can just blame it on, okay, guns were taken away. I think absolutely, when you see a 40% reduction, and it's almost tied entirely to the weekend when you took away the soldiers' firearms. Okay, there's a correlation there that I think is one that you got to take note of. But will it last the long term, or are we going to see people like these other countries finding other ways to commit suicide?
Yeah. And where was that they did the?
That was Israel.
Policy?
That was Israel.
See, this is what's interesting because Israel's suicide rate is already so low. So we're dealing with a really small amount of numbers already. So that does get kind of tricky. We're not, but admittedly, it's worth paying attention to.
Yeah, absolutely.
What's intriguing to me, and this is, you will hear different mental health professionals say different things, and I'll just write the disclaimer that neither of us are mental health professionals. I do sleep with one though. My wife is a counselor. I felt like I should clarify that in case somebody listening to our podcast gets the wrong thing. And so I also do all of her communications and things like that. Or all of her marketing stuff. So I have to know some things on here. What's really, really interesting to me, both as a pastor, dealing with suicide issues and doing a little bit of training there, and then just in conversation with other counselors. A lot of them will say, hey, if you can take away the means, you can temporarily keep them from harming themselves, right? It's a person who is suicidal. That's part of why we do I think they do like a 48-hour, I don't remember what it is now, but if you think somebody's a harm to themselves, they can be held for something like, it's not a large amount of time, but essentially enough time for them to cool down, and that, for lack of a better term, that impulse goes away for the time being. But they're like, that really doesn't fix the issue at all. It just means, it means you hindered it from happening that time. But a person who's at risk for suicide will continue, unless there's some kind of a change, they'll continue to have that impulse. And so you just can't fix that long term through merely removing the means. And so that's one of the things that she'll say. It's frustrating sometimes. Somebody gets taken into the hospital because they're suicidal, and usually it helps for a little while, but they're already at such high risk, and so something else has to happen because you're never going to be able to stop them ultimately unless there is some kind of a change in their health. And so I know just something interesting, because I think you could make the case that, sure, if somebody doesn't have an access to a weapon for these couple of days that they're, intensely desiring to harm themselves, well, yeah, you protect them for those 2 days. But that's going to come back, and you can't indefinitely protect them from that. You've got to deal with the situation another way. And it's just like anything else. When we blame a thing, like a gun or a bridge or a building or whatever it is, it keeps us from actually putting attention on the root issue. And that's part of my frustration is here. If we're going to blame guns for suicide, or we're going to blame anything else, we're not taking time to think, okay, but wait a minute, what's going on that's causing this person to want to do this? Can we really dig in that? And the debates, how often are we having debates on, what is bringing depression on in our society? We're having a whole lot more debates on guns. And I'm like, I just don't think this is the most helpful thing we can do,
Yeah. No, and obviously I agree. I mean, we share a lot of the same theories on a lot of different things. But yeah, again, to me, the problem as I was looking at all this is I'm like, okay, we can't just blame the tool. There's a human condition issue here. That, granted, some countries are way higher and some countries are, a couple of them are way lower. Spain actually is pretty low as well, 7.3 with a non-firearm. That's definitely one of the lower ones. But if all we're doing is looking at the tool that someone's using, that's the problem. It doesn't, like you said, we're not changing their scenario. We're not really addressing the heart of the issue. And is it right that we make everyone else defenseless for someone else who, statistically speaking, if we look at other countries, they're going to find another way to kill themselves? And I don't think we can start, making everyone else defenseless because of that. Like that's not right. But we do need to figure out how do we deal with this. As you know, I do another podcast, and actually one of the recent episodes that we did was all on mental health, because the one of our local churches here, one of what's considered a mega church, which means a mega church basically means they have over 2,000 people a weekend go to it, but they can be anywhere from 2,000 to 30,000.
Yeah.
Had someone who committed suicide. One of their pastors, one of the associate pastors, committed suicide, and it really shines the spotlight on this mental health issue. And there's a human condition here, and I think the danger that we're in is thinking, if I get rid of the tool, that's going to fix the problem, and that doesn't fix the problem. It got rid of a tool. And eventually, if we're looking at these other countries' numbers, eventually they're going to find another way. And we need to start addressing the core issue and not just the tool. It's kind of like, I'm sure you've seen this too, Dan, with England, or was it London itself, where the mayor was like, you don't need a knife at all. Anyone with a knife, you're going to go to jail. No one needs a knife.
Yeah.
Because their murder rate is so sky high with knives, because they took away all the guns. Yeah. Well, eventually they found a way to just kill everyone with a knife.
Yeah.
There's a core human issue here that people, I think, want to ignore, thinking if we take away all these tools and put everyone in a flubberized room, it's going to fix it. And I don't think that's going to fix it.
Not at all. No. Even in England, where everybody's supposed to be nice.
Right.
They're finding unique ways to kill each other. Yeah, it's and I would say it still comes back to people are afraid to address the real issue that's going on, or even explore what that might be. And so it's easier to blame an object, because as soon as you have to start asking questions about why a person is doing a certain thing, well, then you need to examine yourself in the process. And man, people don't like doing that. Those are doors they don't want to open when they start considering the motives of their own hearts. That's what people hate to deal with.
Yeah, and I think too along those lines, I think there are some people who recognize, okay, there's a mental health illness, but I want quote unquote gun control. I want the average person to not have guns. So I'm going to go ahead and use that excuse because it furthers my argument. So you've got there are going to be a core set of people on either side of the aisle, right, who are going to be like, look, I don't care what the stats are or the core reasons behind them. If it supports my position, I'm going to use it. And then the problem, though, then becomes, okay, what's that constant pushing of it? Because right now, I mean, by the time this episode airs, I don't know exactly what's going to happen with Trump. We've heard that they're planning on pushing some gun reform bill out there. I mean, we've already seen him do plenty of unconstitutional things with bump stocks and everything else. And, you know, there's probably been no greater person for the left on this than Trump. They just hate him so much they can't see how they've gotten him to do all the stuff that no one else could do. I mean, redefining what a machine gun is. I mean, like you said on one of our episodes, you can't take away my belt buckle loop or my belt loop. And it's like, come on, guys. Like, this is ridiculous. But they get people who don't think through these issues to hear the soundbite, hey, if we take away guns, it's going to lower suicide. And we probably would see a reduction in suicide in the short term. But would we see it over the long term? And I don't think the data is there for that because, again, when we look at other countries who don't have access to guns, it doesn't seem to matter. The overall suicide rate seems to be about the same. Yeah.
Well, and then people are usually not also considering the secondary, effects of doing something like this. It's people will get all upset and say, well, let's get rid of this, let's get rid of that. But then, we were talking in one of our earlier episodes about how many times guns are used in defense, how many times guns are used to prevent rape, how many mass shootings, and we don't know for sure. We know how many shootings are stopped. We very seldom know how many people would have been harmed in it. But you start thinking about, okay, well, this thing that is happening with suicides is tragic, but it may or may not have any long-term change from a ban. But then on top of it, what we do know is under a ban, here's all these other terrible things that could happen. And so we're always better off to lean towards freedom and responsibility, because I can't change a person's inner motives through outside means. I just can't. Yep. And so what I best do is provide the most freedom, either for defense or for whatever else, so that I am not inhibiting anybody else. I'm not causing damage with my laws or my bans. And then, there's a little bit of danger, but there's going to be danger either way. I would prefer the danger that also includes freedom.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. We're in a crazy time. And how interesting, we're in a time where people are digging in to a particular viewpoint. And I would say this is happening on all sides of issues. They're digging in, and we're at a place where people don't even seem to care about the truth. They want their position to be advanced. They want to be right. And, man, people are just... people are unwilling to discuss even facts at times. Right. And that's a scary time. Put aside gun stuff, which I know is our main focus. I'm having a hard time with just having discussions where we look at plain facts and people say, well, I just don't feel like that. I'm like, well, what? But we're talking about an established truth. Regardless of your feelings on it, this is the case, and people are just unwilling to acknowledge reality. It's a crazy time, man.
Right. Yep. Yeah. I agree completely. I do.
Yeah.
But so I mean, it's a heavy subject, obviously, anytime you start talking about suicide and firearms, because I mean, I've had to deal with suicide many times in my life, not me personally, but dealing with family members who have been suicidal. I've had multiple family members who have been suicidal in an extended family. And so, I mean, it's one of those subjects that, especially in today's day and age, I think more and more people are being affected by it, and so it's a delicate subject to broach, because it also has this deep personal stigma and everything tied to it. Like, if you lost someone who you loved and cared very deeply about to suicide, and they used a firearm, it's very easy to transfer all of that anger and hurt and shame and everything to the object, to the tool.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's an understandable transference. It's not an accurate transference. I mean, it shouldn't be, what we do, but I understand that that's what people do.
Yeah.
The problem then becomes when we start using that as the rationale for why we need to ban something.
Yeah.
And that's the danger.
And then the argument will be, you can't argue with this person because they're hurting so bad. And I'm like, whoa. This is when we don't want someone making a major decision that affects their life and especially anybody else's life. When you're in crisis, you're not supposed to be making major decisions. So anytime we use a crisis, like a mass shooting or a rash of suicides or whatever, to argue against guns or really anything else, I'm like, whoa, this is the last time we need to be talking about this. You're not supposed to make major decisions in crisis. And the fact that, statistics or even just plain facts are not allowed to have a voice because of somebody's feelings bothers me significantly.
Right.
And yeah, because this is how people control things. And I don't like it when the bad guys are in control. Yeah. Well, a couple of things I would say on this. First thing, just since we're on this topic, I'm going to go ahead and mention the Suicide Prevention Lifeline.
Please.
Because there's a chance we've got listeners that are going through some rough stuff. And so I would say 1-800-273-8255. Great number to call. They talk about that moment where people tend to have the impulse. Maybe they've been struggling with depression or suicidal thoughts for a while, and they're just in a moment. The impulse hits them and they make a fast decision. So hey, it's, that impulse will pass. And so give it a call, 1-800-273-8255. Talk to somebody. It gives you a chance. And then I'll also remind, because most of our listeners are men who have a desire to defend their homes. And I tell everybody, listen, if you harm yourself, you cannot defend your family. You're abandoning your family, in fact. And I'm a little harsher with that than I used to be. But partially, my wife and I were discussing this pastor who hurt himself, or, who killed himself. He has 2 sons who will forever be at risk for suicide because of what he decided to do. And I recognize he is in a terrible spot, all kinds of things, but ultimately he made a decision. And that decision is having a terrible effect on his family, and it will be a lifelong effect. And so I'm telling guys out there, man up and call the suicide prevention hotline if you're in some kind of a bad shape like that. Reach out. You do not do to your family what this would cause. And so encouraging. The other thing I'd say is, going out hitting the range with your buddies is a good way to feel better about your life.
It
and
works
I'm serious,
for me, man.
I'm serious. Actually, when you were citing the issue with the Israeli soldiers that aren't taking the guns with them off base. Here's the interesting thing. 2 things are going on there. One, when they're away on the weekend, they're alone.
Yeah.
Right? But when they're on base, you know what? They got access to the guns on base. There's plenty of places they could hide and do whatever they feel like they need to do. But they're not doing it there because they're around people. And so strong, obviously, as a pastor, I'm going to say, ultimately, your issue is a spiritual issue that is spilling over into other things. So I'm like, get into a church, get connected with some people who believe the Bible and love Jesus and will provide you with the message of hope that is the gospel. But whether you're in church or not in church, do fun things with your buddies, man. Go shooting, go to the range. Try not to go to the range alone. Do some training, join a club, do whatever. We're in a culture that is increasingly isolated. Interesting stats I read recently about how people are bowling more, but bowling league membership is down. And so people are like standing right next to each other, bowling, and yet not interacting with each other. And so I'm like, for crying out loud, go to the range, make friends, join a student club, go to competitions, do whatever. But man, one of the best things we could do is, be together and have fun, especially at the range. So that's my little commercial for suicide prevention and shooting.
And I appreciate you sharing that. It's interesting. At my range, the rule is if you come in by yourself, they will not rent you a firearm unless you have your own firearm with you. And the reason for that is suicide. people who were like, well, I'll just go to the range, run a gun, and shoot myself.
Holy cow.
And
Yikes.
so their rule is, if you're by yourself, you have to come in with your own gun. Because if you're going to do it with your own gun, they couldn't stop you anyway, right? I mean,
Right,
that's
yeah.
So they're like, at least then we know if you were going to kill yourself, you didn't need to rent a gun.
Yeah.
And then the other is, so if you want to rent a gun, like at the range I go to, you got to bring a friend with you. Like if you don't have a gun, you got to bring a friend with you. That's their rule. There's got to be two of you, or we don't rent you a gun. And it's good because in college, one of my housemates worked at a local gun range, and they had at least two people kill themselves in the gun range while he worked there. And he was a Navy SEAL that had just finished his active duty. He was in the reserves. This is pre 9/11, so this was as he used to say, he goes, "We haven't been at war since I've been in. Everything I've done was a training exercise," which he always said with like this sly look in his eye. And we're like, "What does that mean? What does that mean?"
That means,
Yeah, exactly. And then after 9/11 happened, and I don't know what happened after that. I mean, I know he's still with us today, and I think reading between the lines, I think he reactivated and did a few deployments, but I don't know for sure because he doesn't put any of that stuff out publicly at all.
Yeah.
But yeah, it happened at the range that he worked at, and so this other range, that's how they handle it. Look, you got to come in with a friend or at least a firearm of your own before.
It's not a bad idea at all, man.
Yeah.
Not
Well,
bad
and
at all.
he said the other thing too is he goes, sometimes people will come in, they'll be like, "Yeah, I just need to buy one bullet." Yeah. No.
What?
Oh yeah. He had it happen.
Oh my gosh.
He had it happen. He had people call into the range saying, "I'm going to kill myself, and what you say right now is going to affect whether or not I do it." I don't know why people do that with the range. I don't like. I could see people calling a
pressure
church.
they're going to put on a guy.
Right. Yeah. It just so happens they happen to pick the one guy who I knew was probably one of the strongest Christians I'd ever met. Literally. Because he was a SEAL, he was forced into a situation where it was like either become a real Christian where that really means something to you, or you abandon it completely and walk away. And for him, he was one of the strongest Christians I ever knew. So
It's awesome, man.
yeah, he always handled things as a Christian and how he addressed things. But yeah, so anyway, guys, I know it was a really kind of not as happy a subject as we normally talk about, but it's one of those things that you're going to have people debate with you on, and hopefully we've given you a little bit of fodder here to go, hey, wait a second here. When you look at non-firearm suicides, our numbers are not much different. In fact, we're lower than some places significantly lower. But hey, if I lived in Slovenia, I could, that sounds like a miserable existence.
Like a rough time.
Yeah.
Or for me, it would be Canada.
Well,
if I ever get moved to Canada, that's when you're going to need to worry about me. You're going to have to call and be like, Dan, are you okay? You going to the range?
Checking regularly with Dan.
My safe word will be A.
Oh, no. So,
yeah, man.
Anyway, so...
No, nothing against Canadians. We love you guys.
Well,
come on down and shoot with us.
Well, no, I'm just kidding.
I'm here next to the lake, ready in case the Canadians try to invade, and we are going to be ready for them. They're going to try hopping across those items. I'm going to send them right back to eat their fake bacon. That's what we're going to do.
Dude, I was talking to this, he was a representative in Arizona, and he was a friend of a friend's, and so one time we were talking, he goes, I got to be honest with you, and this is, probably at this point 14 years ago.
Yeah.
He goes, I got to be honest with you. The border that concerns me the most isn't the southern border. It's the California border. I'd like to build the wall there to keep all you Californians from coming over. I'm like, I actually understand what you mean, man. They're freaking crazy in California, and they're invading the rest of the country.
Well, I've got some friends in like Idaho and up kind of like, upstate kind of Washington area where, they're just kind of outside of like Spokane, Washington over there. And they're like, man, there are people from California moving to here because of taxes and all kinds of other stuff. But he's like, the problem is they're coming in mass and they are voting like they're Californians. And he's like, it's crazy. Like they came here because the economy is better. There's more freedom. Well, now they're turning around and voting like some communists and they're ruining everything. And so they're like, how do we get these guys to not move here? Just kind of a funny time. What's happening up there?
Well, hey, why
as
don't you give out our next sponsor?
Yeah. Hey, everybody, want to tell you, I think we've probably mentioned already about Lake Erie Arms many times, but we are coming up to Glocktoberfest. And this is when we go over the top with food. We normally have something a little bit more than just kind of hot dogs and chili. We start rocking it out. Usually we got a smoker out or something. Free food. We'll have free shootings. You can go out and try any Glock we have out at the range. And then we have incredible deals. Of course, we're a Glock Perfection dealer. We're also a Blue Label dealer. And so just a great opportunity to get whatever Glock you're looking for, probably at the best deal you're ever going to find it anywhere in the United States. I'm a little bit biased, but you're going to be hard pressed to beat these deals, and you get to try it out before you buy. So great time. Look for our check out learms.net and check out some of the other events we have coming up. But it's going to be a great time.
Awesome. Thanks so much, guys, for listening in, and we'll be back next week with another great episode.
You've been listening to the From Concealment Podcast with Pete Mitchell and Dan Sams. Be sure to tune in next week for more gun talk. Also, check out the From Concealment website for more shooting-related goodness at FromConcealment.com.